So some African leaders have called on Western nations to end 2 decades-long sanctions against Zimbabwe. This despite alleged continuous human rights violations on opposition leaders and those that are vocal against the regime. African Union chairperson and Senegalese President Macky Sall says sanctions have disadvantaged many innocent people. Let's speak more on this. We're joined by Dr Charles Sinkala, Africa analyst. Doc, always great to see you. Thank you for availing yourself this afternoon. Given that these sanctions, or rather, let's pose the question, are these sanctions against the people of Zimbabwe or against certain leaders? According to my understanding, at least, it's targeted sanctions, or you can't separate the two?
No, it's very difficult. Thank you very much for having me, and good afternoon to our viewers. Look, you can't separate those, and now that it has taken a very long time, imagine from 2002, after the disputed elections of R.G. Mugabe, former president of Zimbabwe, and these sanctions have continued even after that he has died. You know, we can see that these sanctions were not targeted only for certain elements, such as the elites of the ZANU-PF or the Zimbabweans or Robert Mugabe. Now we see that these sanctions also targets other countries such as South Africa, which are affected, Namibia, Zambia, Botswana, neighboring countries, and as well as because of the migration of the people are leaving Zimbabwe and they are seeking refuge in the neighboring countries. So it is a good call that we can see that heads of states and government like for Democratic Republic of Congo, and as well as the South African representative of President Cyril Ramaphosa, Naledi Pandor, Minister of Foreign Affairs, have aired this issue at the UNGA there. But, you know, all what we can say that airing those issues is like the way people have been singing about the inclusion of the Africans to have a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council. Those speeches, they go nowhere. We need actions on the continent that the leaders should at least, you know, show something, even some defiance in attending the next UNGA, in the UNGA United Nations General Assembly 78. If they can plan like that they are not going there until the sanctions of Zimbabwe are lifted, then we can see that the United Nations will be respecting us much more.
In trying to understand the direct correlation between these targeted sanctions against individuals and their impact on the everyday Zimbabwean and the neighboring countries, as you have outlined, what are those sanctions that have been imposed on these individuals that would impact the country like that?
Look, talking about the individuals, I don't think there's much individuals who are left by ZANU-PF. Yes, President Emmerson Mnangagwa has tried by his level best to adjust to the conditions that they termed to be part of the conditions for them to lift the sanctions. Canada, Australia, United States of America, UK, and many other multinational, international companies, especially from the West, those are the ones who imposed those sanctions, including the United States of America. Some of those conditions, President Emmerson Mnangagwa has tried to eliminate those who were put on the list of the elites of the Zimbabwean ZANU-PF government from the last government, you know, but these sanctions continues. And the other person also mentioned that I've seen an article where they said these sanctions is not only on the elite government officials as individuals, but as well as the country to succumb to certain conditions that these European countries they want, such as the land reform reversal, that they must readjust that land because of a lot of white farmers who lost their piece of lands that must be given back to them, which is a very controversial topic in terms of the land issue in Zimbabwe, as it now has changed hands to those people. Now either they are squatting there or they have actually taken the land to redevelop. And these are the challenges that President Emmerson Mnangagwa will face, to go and now re-evict those people, you know, and give it back to the whites who has claimed that those are part of the conditions. It's quite unfortunately that, you know, the United Nations has put a deaf ear regarding Zimbabwe, which is almost 2 decades of hardships, as we can see how South Africa has been dearly affected among all those countries which are surrounding the southern part. Look, we hope that the United Nations, can also look at these issues in the Central African Republic and as well as Democratic Republic of Congo, the conflicts in Zimbabwe in terms of the sanctions, as much as they look at the issues such as the issues in Yemen, Ukraine and other parts of the world.
Dr. Sinkala, you advocate for African leaders to be in defiance in terms of attending the UN Security Council meeting that's coming up next. In terms of the region, right, you spoke of the impact to South Africa and other neighboring countries. Have they done enough to maybe make sure that one of the conditions of those countries that have imposed the sanctions on these particular individuals is the maintaining of human rights in the country, right, where some Zimbabweans in 2022 still feel that their rights are being trampled upon? You speak of the likes of Tsitsi Dangaremba, for instance.
Yes, indeed. And I think, look, we African leaders who are on the continent, so we always, once they call for the United Nations Security Council, not really Security Council, of course, they invite leaders to just go and take a photo session. From that photo session, then they leave them outside as they go inside the meetings and discuss difficult issues around the world. But what I can say is the African leaders must be respected. They must demand their respect from the United Nations Security Council, including the United Nations. The president there, or the chairperson, Guterres, is aware of the problems on the African continent, and they are aware of the contribution. Africa contributes almost 40% of the United Nations income, if you compare it in terms of the number of countries which contribute. But I'm happy that President Cyril Ramaphosa did not spend time there. He actually delegated to his Foreign Affairs Minister, Naledi Pandor. We need to show the agency in terms of us being looked at as Africans, especially Zimbabwe. Defiance is the only option that the African leaders should table out on the United Nations. The next UNGA, they should not attend that until the signs and the discussions of lifting the sanctions in Zimbabwe. Yes, the people of Zimbabwe and those who claim that they've been unfairly treated by other African nations, yes, of course, for each and every country it is suffering the influx of people, visitors, and those who are illegal immigrants in that country. And not only that, there is the urbanization, people from Port Elizabeth, people from rural areas in Vryheid and many other parts of South Africa, they are coming to the cities to claim the economical value. But that pie is a small pie that it cannot afford to fend for each and every person. Yes, we prescribe for human rights, for every human right, for anybody coming from elsewhere. In fact, Zimbabwe is one on the list for people who can be given asylum permission, and I've likely mentioned that the Foreign Affairs, or Home Affairs rather, Ministry, Dr. Aaron Swaledi has tried by all means to give them some certain privileges to be accommodated. But for how long is a question that has to be asked. Yes, the human rights activists from Zimbabwe and other parts of the world, they should not claim that South Africa or any other country which is hosting these visitors, they are being unfair and not conforming to the human rights and the convention as signed, but as well we must look at the bigger picture.
Unfortunately, point well made, looking at the bigger picture. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we can afford for today. Thank you very much. Dr. Charles Sinkala is an Africa analyst.